We're good. Good morning. Good morning. That makes for a good entrance. It is good to be in Harrisonville this morning. I'm Bob Fard, the Director of Congregational Excellence. Good to be in the contemporary service here. And we've been here all weekend, had a great weekend, and enjoyed always being almost home. It's one of the few places I come and preach across the state, and I say I'm from Creighton, Missouri, and for most of you, I don't need to explain where that's at and try to come up with that. And so it's been great to be a part of the weekend. People have been very open to us, and Pastor Scott for his hospitality and his openness. I don't know if you all know this, but you have one of our better pastors in the state. And let's give him some appreciation for all the good work that he does, and has made our task easy this weekend as we have been here in Harrisonville. I grew up on a little street in Creighton, Missouri, in a house that was the house next door to the corner house. Do y'all know what I mean? That kind of corner lot. My dad always wanted that corner lot, and that old house on the corner lot was just nasty. It never had any paint on it. It had weeds growed up everywhere, and it was just a piece of work. And but you're living in a little town in the 70s. In Creighton, and there's only one blinking light, and it doesn't work. There's not a lot to do during the day as three elementary boys. I was the oldest of three. And so that old house was a great place to play. It was like going to Worlds of Fun, except not. And we would play trucks in that old house, and we would lock girls in that old house. In fact, I locked your sister in the closet in that old house. And we even locked a girl in the closet one time and lost the key. Had those old church keys, and that really excited my mother quite a bit, and that's when I usually would get called Robert Dean, is when those kinds of things. We set that old house on fire 3 times, and the third time it burnt her down, mostly because my dad was the fire chief, and he basically said to us, we were the fire department, don't go get the truck, just let it go. And but it was a great way to grow up in the 70s with 3 boys, but at night, that old house took on a different flavor. At night, that old house was a bit spooky. I mean, there wasn't a lot of lights in it. It was dark, and it was just scary to 3 elementary boys. And yet we had to go by that old house at night to get to anything we wanted to go to. If we wanted to go over to my grandmother's house, you had to get by that old house. You wanted to go down to the little Methodist church, you had to go by that old house. You wanted to go down to the park where we got in trouble, you had to go by that old house. And so I can remember as 3 little boys, and sometimes your sister would stand out into the street, in that little gravel street, and we'd get up the moral courage to go 1, 2, 3, and dash across there. At least something would jump out of that old house and get us. And one night it did. Big old black snake jumped out of that front scoop of that old house, and we went screaming back into my mother, who promptly went to the garage and got the hoe out and whacked it to death right there in front of the 3 boys. And I've needed to have therapy ever since. And probably today you'd be in some sort of trouble for doing that. And but it was a great way to grow up. But it just kind of starts that interesting thing in our lives of safety, safe places versus risky places. And in my life, I grew up in a very safe place, a very safe home with good parents and a lot of love, and a good place. Didn't know it at the time as a teenager, but as you look back on it, anybody grow up like that, you're just lucky to have parents there, and it was a good place. It was safe. It was never a place you couldn't go. And yet I know most of the time in my life, the things that I learned the most actually were over here in the risk zone, where I took some chance. How many of you have children? See, there you go. You're over here in the risk zone. And how many of you with those children actually put them on bicycles and tricycles? Anybody do that? Didn't you know what was going to happen? We lived in a big house in South Kansas City, one of our first churches, a long kind of 3,600 square foot home somebody had given the church, and it was just huge ranch house. I mean, you could drive a freight train through it. And in the basement, it never had anything in it. It was just great big old wide open space, and that's where we taught Joe, our oldest, to ride his tricycle. And there was probably 3,000 square feet of nothingness. There were only 2 poles down there in that basement, and one day I decided to leave Joe down on his tricycle. I went up to work on my sermon or something. That's a noble thought. And as I was gone, I'm thinking, now what could happen? What could go wrong? There's this great big open space, only 2 poles. I wasn't upstairs 3 minutes. Boom! You know, screaming and yelling in tears, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I am in trouble. When Susan gets home, my wife, I am in some difficulty for leaving my child downstairs today. They might call DSF that you left your child alone in the basement. Of course, he's bloodied in the nose and hit the poles, and my first thought was, how did you manage this? There's all this emptiness, and you hit the pole. How many of you went ahead and gave those teenagers driver's licenses, cars and things? Didn't you know? Didn't your insurance company let you know that this was unsafe? That they were going to be a missile into the rest of us? And yet you did it anyway. What kind of parents are you people in Cass County? I'll tell you why you did it. You hoped one day they would leave. And in my world that I grew up in, that's what you did. You leave, but there's something different today going on because now they leave. Mine are 26 and 23, and they come back. Just for you who aren't there yet. And then they leave again and come back again. Some sort of deal. My daughter's on a 10-year college plan. Back and forth. This safe from all alarms where things are safe and secure, and yet over here is where you learn most things in a risk zone, yet if you stay too long in the risk zone, you can get hurt. If you spend too much time over here, you can hurt other people. In fact, about 2.5 years ago, so somebody in New York stayed over here in the risk zone too long, and my 401k became a 201k in about 15 minutes, apparently. And it's taken me a whole 2.5 years to sort of get back. It's just interesting, if you stay here too long, you can hurt you and people you don't even know. But if you stay only in the risk zone, or only in the safe zone, you actually don't learn a lot. It's safe, it's secure, but it's not necessarily where our learning goes on. 2 years ago, we had our 30th wedding anniversary, Susan and I can't believe we've been married 30 years, but she's always wanted to go to Hawaii to see where her dad, my father-in-law, is 93. He still lives down here in Garden City and on the farm, and he was a Pearl Harbor survivor, one of the few people that sunk in a boat and survived that. And so she'd always wanted to go see where that occurred, and so on the 30th anniversary, we booked a plane to go over, and somewhere in the midst of that conversation, my daughter decided she wanted to go, which I thought was a really poor idea, personally, but somehow wasn't consulted in the process. But anyway, she wanted to go over to skydive. And my daughter's me. Some of you know me. I like running into fires and things, and pretty much I like to jump before you. My mother would always say, "How come, Bobby, you're always jumping before you look? You're always leaping before you think." I like that, and my daughter's the same way. She wanted to go over there and jump out of an airplane. And that really hadn't crossed my mind in my life about jumping out of an airplane, but she wanted to jump out of an airplane. And, you know, when your 21-year-old daughter wants to do something with Dad, I try to make that happen because usually the only thing she wants from Dad at 21 is my money. And so she wants to do something. So I try to make that happen. So I get out and read all the stuff, and the only problem was you had to be under 200 pounds. Well, I'm not. And so I decided I really wanted to make this work, and so I went on a big diet that summer, and I lost 25 pounds. I really worked hard, but when the fall plan came, I still was not under 200 pounds. I'm so sorry, this is probably not going to work. But so we went on over anyway, got to the condo where we were staying, and right on the little shelf there was this thing, skydiving, $59.99. Now my mind immediately thinks, what kind of a plane do you get for $59.99? And so anyway, I opened it up and looked at it, and it has all the rules, and I call them, and, you know, you probably don't have any openings. We haven't booked anything. Oh, we got plenty of openings, you know. But it says right there in the rules, you got to be under 200 pounds. I'm not. He says, well, how far over are you? I said, well, I'm 225. He says, that'll be $50 extra. Well, shoot, if I'd have known that, I wouldn't have dieted, you know. I'd have just gone. So anyway, I called my daughter, tell her, hey, it's on. When you get here, we'll skydive. And you can skydive in Missouri, but apparently it's only 7,000 feet. But in Hawaii, it's 14,000 feet. She wanted to jump higher and not breathe longer as you come down through there. So she gets there, and make a long story short, we get out to the airport. My wife would not go, and she thought this was crazy. And so Amy and I get out there, and sure enough, I just want you to know it's a $59 plane. It's got a door on the side with no door, and it's got one, you know, engine that they kind of made go, and it just sounded terrible, and there was 5 sets of us because you're tandem jumping, and they hooked me up with a big boy, bigger than me. And I'm thinking, I thought this was a problem being big. He said, yeah, but you got to have a counterbalance if you're this big. But you're going to have to go on the plane first because you're going to be the first one down the planet Earth. And so you go in by size. That's an embarrassing event. So the biggest first, You know, and you work your way down to the lightest. And the lightest was my daughter and her partner. And so they're right at the door that has no door. So we're taxiing down the runway real fast, not real fast, and up. And I look at her. She looks back at me, and she looks terrified. Of course, as we're going up, it's too late. Both of us have not thought this through. There's no out. And you don't not jump because the plane is so small, you're in line. So if one doesn't jump, that means nobody behind you jumps. So you're jumping. There's no choice. So we get up there. I get my camera out, and I get ready. Take a picture. She goes out the door. I snap it. She leaves. No, if she left, I snapped. Just want to save your expenses. It doesn't take a picture of somebody going out the door at 400 miles an hour. All you get is the door. You know, when you go out a door at 400 miles an hour, you just are gone. Now that's when I begin to worry. There went my baby. I am in trouble with Susan. I mean, she just disappeared. So they all go out. It comes my turn. We jump out, and it's a pretty lightning speed down with two big boys. It was just really flying, you know. And we're skating down. And he said, he hits me. You want to pull the ripcord? Pull it. Up we go, and then I couldn't breathe. And all that whole event took 2 minutes and 6 seconds. And I am on the ground. I mean, it's a fast descent for 500 pounds there running down. And my daughter's nowhere in sight. I mean, she left the plane long ago. Where's my daughter? And about 10 minutes later, she arrived. I mean, when you're that light, you get to float around, you know, and see things. You know, we never really saw anything. Whoo! You know, it wasn't I never saw an island. What island? Whoom, right on down. But anyway, it was fun. This interesting tension we live in between risk and safety in our lives. If you get one far to the other, it doesn't work out. There's a story in the Bible where one of my favorite characters, the Apostle Peter and Jesus, are out by the water in Matthew 14:23 in the Message. I like the Message because it reads a little differently. Starting in verse 22, it says, as soon as the meal was finished, he insisted that the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side while he dismissed the people. With the crowd dispersed, Jesus climbed the mountain so he could be there by himself. He stayed there alone to pray late into the night. By the way, if God is ever going to do anything in your life, you need to know you better start with prayer. It's not going to be working. So he's up there alone. Meanwhile, the boat was far out into the sea. The wind came up against it, and they were battered by the waves. Now, I grew up in a little Methodist church where somehow we were taught that if it really was of God, there had to be consensus, and everybody agreed, and everybody was on board, and everybody was going, and there wasn't any resistance. And yet, when I got to be an adult and started reading the Bible, well, it might have been the first time I actually started reading the Bible, but reading the Bible, I realized that most of the time when God starts to do something, there's always resistance. Somebody's always unhappy. There's always waves churning beneath your feet. And so it was churning beneath their feet. The wind was up against it, battered. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came towards them walking on the water. They screamed out of their wits, it's a ghost. They were cried out in terror. But Jesus came quick to comfort them, saying, courage, it is me. Can you say that with me? Courage. It is me. Say it again.
Courage.
You don't sound like you got courage. Come on.
Courage.
It is me. Don't let me frighten you. You may need to remember that at the reading of the report today. It takes some courage. What was that word?
Courage.
If you're going to be a Jesus follower, it takes some
courage.